Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this session, which is Town or City? Should the focus for housing and investment be in our towns or in our cities? And I think this is an incredibly timely conversation to have today as we think about the changes in our communities and our development patterns post-COVID-19. How should we develop in terms of building a stronger social fabric? And what do we need to get us there? I'm Kate Henderson. I'm the Chief Executive at the National Housing Federation, and we are the voice of housing associations in England. Our members own and manage around 2.5 million homes, providing housing to 6 million people. And we've seen a tremendous response through the pandemic right across the country. We've also, on a personal level, all valued our homes in a different way. So for many of us who are joining the call today, who are part of the conference today, our home will have been our place of work. It would have been where we've been doing homeschooling. It would have been our place of rest and of safety. But for others, home wasn't the same. It wasn't that during that intense period of lockdown. And I think that's a really important context for how we think about development going forward. We have a record 3.7 million people living in overcrowded homes in England, and that's
Simon and Rob. I think we've got an audience on here of about 40 people.
During lockdown,
I was expecting Kate Henderson chairing the session.
Spent it in a home that consists of just one room, and we have over 62,000 families living in temporary accommodation. We did some research with YouGov and looking at the English Housing Survey back in June, and that found that nearly a third of adults said that their mental or physical health had been affected by their housing conditions during lockdown. So not enough space, or the housing wasn't good enough quality. So I think that's a really important context. Yes. Hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Kate.
Everyone, yeah?
I can't hear Kate.
Can you hear me okay, Rob?
I can hear you, Kate.
Yeah. Great. So I'll keep going. Sorry for any disruption.
Technology issue. Gavin, I think Kate can't see you and you can't see her. I think that's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't hear Kate.
So
if Kate wants to ask a question, she'll have to relay it to Rob or I.
The way the technology goes or doesn't goes. So I'm going to keep going ahead. I think just really to say that in the debate around, whether it's town or city, it is about ensuring that the homes we build are high quality, they're safe, they're secure, and they meet the needs of how we're living now and how we're going to live in the future. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rob Perrins, who is the Chief Executive at Berkeley Group. Rob.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kate, and delighted to be here on this panel with Gavin and Simon. I think the question about good development, where should be focused? I think, to me, I've always said it should be brownfield first, but I also think it should be focused on what we all know as poor greenbelt. I think there's a lot of poor greenbelt, so it needs to be everywhere. It needs to be in cities, it needs to be in towns, it needs to be in villages. Now, the key thing, I think, is that we do build 300,000 homes. This is critical for our country. They need to be beautifully built, as you said, delivered along the right mix of infrastructure and local amenities. I actually do believe that London has an advantage as a city because of these great transport links. My worry slightly with government policy, I wouldn't spend personally the money on HS2. I would spend £100 billion on infrastructure in town centres, in places like Birmingham, where Simon was leader as well. I think if you can sort the infrastructure out in our regional towns and cities, you will bring people back into the life into those cities and allow great connectivity and transportation to those cities. So my area in Birmingham as well, I would really improve the metro, and then that would really open up a huge amount of brownfield sites and development. So that would be my one area of change to government policy. I'm fully supportive of infrastructure. You asked the question about trends on COVID-19, and we're still seeing the trends. We still don't, there's been some trends advance, but we fundamentally believe that people still want to live in city centres and in close to the town centres. And we're seeing very good demand in London currently through this pandemic. Our demand actually at the moment is about 20% down. I think people are looking to be closely connected. I do believe that the cities will open up again. I do believe the workplace has a place. I think people will go back to work 3 to 4 days a week, so they'll still want to live close in. What they'll want to have is be close to good shops, great spaces within their developments, tranquil spaces within. So that it's really making a high quality neighbourhood for them to live within. And so, that demand will be there. What people really are asking us for is making sure, as you say, people are working from home is really good connectivity. And that's, as we said, very good broadband. Gavin, I can help you probably with better broadband if you'd buy Berkeley House. Always got to try and sell a home wherever I am. But to me, it's people really do want high quality, low carbon, electric charging points, live sustainable lives with good transport links. And we're still seeing that underlying demand. I think, so I don't see a wholesale move out of town centres. I do think some of the town centres and cities will have to repurpose how they bring life back in, especially on the commercial side. But I do fundamentally believe that London will be a world city and will benefit going forward. As the issues that London were facing and the UK were pre-COVID and pre-Brexit. And my fundamental concern is the supply side, and it still is on the supply side. I think this country is really struggling. London, probably the biggest struggle, where we're down to 12,000 homes. That really is when now the new white paper is saying we need 95,000, and I don't see supply easing anytime soon. And my worry with the white paper coming through is the number of concerns again in the transition point, and I hope it will reduce bureaucracy. But it's this one infrastructure levy they're trying to bring in. The industry supported the infrastructure levy instead of having Section 106s. But for large-scale brownfield regeneration, an infrastructure levy won't work. One size fits all because of all the infrastructure, the contamination, and all the other issues you need to deal with in very large-scale brownfield. So I have a number of concerns on the white paper, and will that really increase supply? So the biggest issue during COVID is on supply side. The planning authorities are trying to work incredibly hard, but are really having a number of other issues that they need to deal with. In terms of social fabric, and you ask about social fabric and the contribution, I think what we have to do is really consult with communities. You just can't do this in isolation, and that's that consultation, and make sure you individually design the places for the people in the local community. I mean, Simon and I were talking about when he was leader of Maidenhead, we've developed a site in Taplow, just outside his borough. But again, it was putting the bridges in place, putting the local community infrastructure in place is very important, and great design. And then once we've built these places, making sure people can influence the places they live within, and that influence, you make sure they're very safe. So putting in great community plans. So that's all I'd like to touch on, Kate, probably as an introduction, and happy to come back later.
So I'm going to jump in for Kate, just to moderate the session while we sort out her tech issues. Ms. Perrins, that was incredibly fascinating. Lord Barwell, can I turn to you next to offer your thoughts on the big question?
Yes, pleasure to be with you, and lovely to see Rob and Simon again. Can I just check before I launch in that I can be heard okay?
Got you here, loud and clear.
Everyone is smiling or putting their thumbs up. That's good to hear. So look, my headline answer to the exam question, town or city, is exactly the same as Rob's, like both and more. Towns, cities, villages, and new settlements as well. So I think if you're going to have any hope at all of reaching the supply target that the government inherited from the government that I was part of, you're going to need to develop in all of those locations across the country. But I suppose the more sophisticated question you were trying to ask us is the balance between those going to shift at all? And I'd like to focus on three things which I think are going to inform the balance of where homes in this country go over the next 20 to 30 years, which are the effect of the pandemic, the effect of the government's levelling up agenda, and the transition to a net zero economy. So perhaps dealing with them in chronological order, as it were, in terms of their immediate salience, that the levelling up agenda, and actually is something very much that Theresa was focused on as well. She talked about a country that works for everyone, but it was a very similar agenda of saying that growth shouldn't just be concentrated in London and the near southeast, but should be spread more evenly across the whole country. And when we were in CLG working on the new formula for housing need, and obviously the government is proposing to go a bit further and making the numbers prescriptive on local authorities, but when we were drawing up that formula, there was a real argument that went on between Number 10 and the Treasury. And the Treasury's view, put in simple terms, was build the houses where people want to live. Look at affordability at the moment around the country. What's the ratio between average earnings and average house prices in particular local authority areas? That tells you where demand is far exceeding supply, and that should inform where the housing gets built. And if you follow that model, you are going to very heavily concentrate housing provision in London and what I would call the inner southeast, the ring of local authorities immediately around Greater London, and a few other pockets around the country, but very heavily in those areas. And the area where Simon was a leader would have been absolutely one of those that would have had significant numbers. And Theresa's view was, well, hang on, my economic policy is all about trying to even out growth in this country and trying to provide better economic opportunities in parts of the Midlands and the North. And surely housing policy should make a contribution to that. And the Treasury's response was, well, that's all very well, but the market isn't going to build the homes in places where people don't want to live. And in the end, we came to a compromise where we started off, if you like, with what the affordability picture was telling you, and then we made some adjustment to that to try and smooth it out a bit, but recognise that there was a limit in how far you could go. And in passing, I would just observe that I was quite interested that the government's planning consultation paper that it published just before the summer break was so heavily back in the HMT, build the homes where the existing affordability problems are solely, given politically how much the rhetoric of this government is about levelling up. It was kind of like not consistent, I felt, with the government's overall sort of policy message. So then I think the second question is, what impact does COVID have on all of this? And it seems to me that there are probably two impacts. Rob touched on one of them, which is, how do we think our work lives are going to change in the long term as a result of this pandemic? So I think if I heard you right, Rob, you were suggesting that you thought maybe people would end up working 3 to 4 days in an office and a little bit of time at home. I think probably my instinct is it'll be a bit more of an even blend than that. You know, in terms of my working life, I would expect to be doing 2 to 3 days in the office, 2 to 3 days at home after this crisis, once we're through it. But maybe time will tell. But I certainly think the more it's an even blend, the more you will see some shifts in the housing market in terms of where you see demand. I think if people were only commuting into an office 2 days a week, they'd probably tolerate a longer commute if that gave them a better in terms of what they could purchase in the housing market in different parts of the country. So that's one potential effect, and we can argue about how far that will go. To a degree, it's we're all guessing a little bit about what we think that blend will be in the long term. But I think the thing that's more clear cut is planning policy and housing policy is really going to have to rethink the role of high streets, because one thing that the pandemic has indisputably done is massively accelerated the transition that we were seeing in retail. This was something that was already underway in terms of the transition to how we shop, and the pandemic has just been a huge accelerant to that. And so one of the things that public policy is going to have to do is try to help transform the state of our high streets, and that is bound to mean much more mixed-use development on high streets and much more of a sort of residential core in our town centres in particular. And it's something that I would expect this government to be particularly passionate about. It's something that Simon at Homes England, I expect, will get asked to play a significant role in, because if you think about the election that the government won just before Christmas, they won by winning a series of towns in the north and Midlands of the country, which were Leave voting, but actually not just about Brexit, a general sense that the whole way the world worked wasn't working in favour of their local communities. And one kind of sign about how is your local community doing is how does your local high street look. So we've seen the Towns Fund already, and I would expect the government to double down on that off the back of this pandemic. And then the third sort of key long-term trend that may have some effect here is the transition to a net zero economy. And that is bound to, over time, lead to increasing pressure for mixed-use development so that more of us can live and work, can live close to where we work in order that we don't have to have huge commutes in order to get to our place of work. So that, I think, may lead to some encouragement for a sort of revitalisation of our towns and away from this sort of agglomeration benefit we've seen of a few major city centres in the country where economic activity is very heavily concentrated. But clearly that is a much more long-term trend that we want to see played out. And then the final thought I had before I hand back to Kate, and she briefly appeared but seems to have disappeared again now, we are asked to comment on this issue of social fabric, and I agree strongly with both the points that Rob made there. I think design is a really important consideration. If we're wanting people to be proud of their places where they live and feel that their community is on the up, then visual appearance is important, and that isn't just about getting redevelopment, but it's about getting high quality development that respects the existing character of the place. And then I think his point about, I wouldn't necessarily agree with him on HS2, but I certainly think he was right to say that investment in local civic infrastructure is hugely important in terms of transforming the feel of places. And actually, I suspect when we see the National Infrastructure Plan that the government at the moment is committed to publishing in the autumn, although maybe it will be delayed if the budget is delayed, we'll probably see quite a lot of money for those kinds of high street transformation style local civic infrastructure schemes. Because if you want to change how a town in the Midlands or the North feels, realistically, Northern Powerhouse Rail is going to take quite a few years to deliver. And it's some of these local civic infrastructure programs that can affect quite quick improvements in how a place looks and feels. But I will stop there and let Simon have his go, and look forward to answering any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Lord Barwell, and I hope you can hear me if you can't see me, and I'm sorry for the tech problems I'm having.
I can hear you, but I can't see you. That is exactly right.
Well, so apologies to everybody watching as well who can't see me, but hopefully you can hear me too. I'm going to hand over to Simon Dudley, who's the interim chair of the board at Homes England, who will be familiar to many of you. I'm going to log out and log back in again and give it a third attempt, but I will be back to chair the discussion. And thank you so much to everybody who's popping questions in the Q&A box as well. But over to Simon now, and hopefully you'll be able to see me in just a minute.
Right, well, thank you very much, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone. Look, thank you very much for those words from Rob and Gavin earlier. Look, I think in a sentence, we should be investing in towns, in cities, and in villages, and we should be investing where people want to live, and we should be building the sorts of homes that they want to live in. So, no, I wouldn't want to be specific about particularly one location over another location. I've got some interesting data here from Ipsos Mori in a recent survey conducted by them. After describing two potential homes, 49% of people would choose to live away from a city or town centre, whilst 31% would live closer to a city or town centre, which really says it all, because people are making a living decision, a lifestyle decision, a buying decision, a renting decision based upon what suits their personal circumstances and their aspirations. So we should try and provide the homes that people want, who want them in a city or in a town or in a village, or indeed a new town or a new village. So there was another question which when they were asked, would they prioritise living in a good quality home over living somewhere with a good community spirit, 37% of Generation Z and 34% of Generation Y agreed, compared with only 23% of baby boomers. So again, it just shows that people's individual aspirations vary enormously. And of course, COVID-19 complicates this overall picture. And indeed, we've just had an announcement from the Prime Minister in the House that our homes are going to be even more important to us for the next 6 months and beyond, whilst we battle this terrible disease. But I'd like to pick up on a couple of things which both Rob and Gavin said. And Rob mentioned a development that Berkeley Homes have got in Taplow Riverside, which is only about a mile from where I'm sitting here at the moment. This was right next to the Thames. It's something which had stalled for probably 20, 25 years. Berkeley Homes brought that forward, but they did something very clever there, I thought, in that this is something which is right next to the Thames. In one side, you've got Theresa May's constituency. On the other side, you've got the Beaconsfield constituency. And they built a bridge at not an insignificant cost to Berkeley Group that spanned the two communities. It was a beautiful bridge. A gentleman called Martin Knight was involved in that, a bridge architect. And that really brought the two communities together. It managed to land the development, which previously had been contentious. You had in the area where it was developed both parish councils, you had a sort of borough council, you also had a county council. So that was an example of where some social infrastructure, in a way, was built, which created something which actually everyone sort of thought, that's fantastic, that improves the area. What is in it for people who live in an area when new housing is being built in an area? And I think that was an example of doing that. And Gavin made an important point about, look, how are our high streets going to change? And I'm going to draw on another situation, just here, a mile from where I am, in Maidenhead, where you had, an enclosed town centre shopping centre, which had probably gone down about 80% in value, about 170,000 square feet, some not great retail units in there, a lot of voids in there as well. But that has been acquired by Rob Tinknell, developer of Battersea Power Station. And they brought forward an outline planning application for 1 million square feet of mixed use, offices, retirement living, residential, affordable housing in there, more kind of smaller retail units, taking off the top of this whole thing. Fundamental change to what is a town centre, which, if you ever go to Maidenhead, lovely place, town centre, not so much. So, again, there's an opportunity to bring things forward. And these are all opportunities coming back to Homes England, where we want to work with the sector in order to bring forward, more and better housing. We are a national organisation. We work alongside our local partners in many places across the country, and we're serious about employing people in the communities in which we're working in. So we have in the region of 1,100 highly skilled staff at the moment, who are majority based in the Midlands, the Northwest, in the Northeast, and we recently moved our headquarters to Coventry, so we're not hanging out in Westminster. So the agency itself is doing a huge amount, and perhaps just to talk to a couple of other areas here. Just this morning, we announced that we were investing £50 million in a new joint venture between Sigma Capital and EQT for PRS developments in and around Greater London. They're looking to put together £1 billion of capital, 3,000 new homes for the PRS. So that's an opportunity where you're investing in, sort of in a large urban environment like London. And very important and close to Kate's heart, there was recently the announcement of the £12.2 billion affordable homes programme, the new affordable homes programme, which will be hopefully creating in the region of 180,000 new affordable homes, in the region of 50% of those being ownership type product. And I'm particularly pleased that contains the £2 billion, which I watched Theresa May announce in the 2017 party conference that was going into more affordable housing, and it's turned up in this thing that we just announced. So government doesn't always move fast, but it does get there in the end. So look, finally, just to sum up, look, from a Homes England perspective, all of our various partners are incredibly important to us in the mission to get to 300 new homes, but also to build beautiful places. And there is no preclusion on where we will be investing the taxpayer money to bring about those homes. The determinative it is, where do people want to live? And I think the Ipsos Mori data indicates that different people have different priorities, and each one will be their individual castle. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. And firstly, apologies for me for disappearing multiple times, but hopefully you can all see and hear me this time, which is great. For those of you who are watching and didn't hear me in the introduction, I really sort of made a plea for one, how just important our home is to us, but how we felt that more than ever over the last 6 months. And actually all of the speakers have really reflected on that in terms of the way we're going to live in the future, the way we're going to work in the future. But I think during that period of lockdown, home has really been, our sanctuary, place of work, place of homeschooling. Our lives have been in our homes, and for those of us lucky enough to have a home with space where you can work, that's fine. But actually we have huge levels of overcrowding, we have kids in temporary accommodation, we do need to build lots more homes. And I think this debate around high streets, civic investment, zero carbon, quality, all of that has got to be part of the future of housing. Loads of questions here for our speakers. I'm going to start with one which is a bit more related to my previous job than my new one. But in making future investment in housing, do you think there's a case for new settlements? And I'm going to pick Lord Barwell first.
Yes, definitely. So my experience as housing minister was in some areas it's sometimes easier politically to win support, and Simon's probably as well qualified as me to answer this, but it's sometimes easier to win support for a new settlement than to just tag on bits to existing settlements. People are often quite sensitive about particularly if you've got sort of greenbelt or metropolitan open land, the existing boundaries of existing settlements and merging two places together. Whereas if you can find somewhere where you can build a new settlement, often it's easy to get political support for that. The risk if you put all of your eggs in that basket is the build-out rate. I think you've got to be careful if you're just putting all of your eggs in new settlement baskets. But I think absolutely it has a contribution to make towards getting to the total numbers that we need to see in this country.
Thank you. Just Kevin, there's a question here about there simply isn't enough brownfield land. Should we be thinking about greenbelt as part of this? Do you think we've got enough greenfield land to be able to meet housing need, and particularly in the southern half of the country, and particularly in the southeast where there's huge housing pressures, but also very well loved and cherished greenbelt as well?
So there definitely is enough land across the country as a whole. The issue is it depends where your balance is about where you're building, and it's certainly true that there are some authorities around the edges of London that are very heavily greenbelt and will not meet the kind of numbers the government is asking them to meet without building on the greenbelt. My view on this, and I think this is what Rob was saying, but he may want to come in and clarify, is you don't necessarily have to have the huge political row of a review of all the greenbelt everywhere. If I think of my old constituency, and for the benefits of those who don't know, I represented a seat called Croydon Central, which included some of the outer London boundary. There are bits of greenbelt that are beautiful, and there are bits of greenbelt that are serving an important purpose in separating one place from another place. But for example, there was a piece of greenbelt just on the edge of my constituency that was a waste processing plant. And if you'd asked the people who lived nearby if they'd like the council to buy the plant, close it down and build several hundred new homes in place of it, they would have embraced you with open arms and pleaded with you to get on with it. So there are definitely places in the greenbelt where I think it would make sense to me. And I think what we have to try and do is have a sort of rational debate about this and not let emotion cloud that. Greenbelt is not an environmental policy. It's an anti-sprawl policy. So I think people do care about maintaining separation between places. And I think that's a good public policy objective. But that doesn't mean that there aren't bits of greenbelt land that we could release for housing.
Great, thank you. Simon, your views on new settlements from a Homes England perspective. I'm sure there's support given all the investment that's going into North Stowe at the moment, but actually just building on Lord Barwell's point there about kind of build-out rates, that's been a scheme that really is accelerating now, but it's taken a very, very long time. So it'd be good to get your views on that.
Yeah, look, absolutely. North Stowe, the largest new town that there's been in decades. It's to northwest of Cambridge. It's an area, Cambridge, one of the highest affordability ratios in the country. There's a chronic issue there. Now, and that is now moving at pace, North Stowe. But to give people an idea about what the state has had to do that, to invest in the front end infrastructure there, then to create, the parcels of land for build out, to accelerate the build out as we work with house builders. We, Homes England, us, the taxpayer, have invested over £250 million there. That will be recoverable, but that is the scale of the capital deployment which is necessary to bring about a new town of 10,000 new homes. I think there's about 8 secondary schools, about 6 primary schools there, in an area of, I want to say the affordability ratio is maybe knocking on 20 times in Cambridge. Really a significant issue. But to give you an idea of the scale of the task, when we talk about 300,000 homes a year, North Stowe, biggest new town in decades, 10,000 homes, to accelerate that, to bring it forward, £250 million of investment, which will be recovered as and when. So, absolutely new towns are part of the solution here in an area where there is housing need and demand for that. People want to live there, so let's build the homes for them there. Burgess Hill is another example of that in mid-Sussex. Hugely supportive local authorities there, the politicians there, over 5,000 new homes there, the MPs there. Again, very significant capital mobilisation there to put in the front end infrastructure, because sadly, Rob and other major house builders, sometimes it's just to get the accelerated build out, to make some of these particular sites viable. The state is having to step in to invest the front end money for infrastructure in order to unlock the housing opportunities. So, absolutely new settlements are a part of the mix.
Great, thank you. Rob, I'm going to come to you on this as well, because I think it'd just be good to hear about your appetite for scale development. And of Berkeley Group's schemes that I've been to, I know this isn't a new settlement out of a city, but both Kidbrooke Village and Woodbury Down are absolutely phenomenal large-scale developments, large-scale new communities, renewed communities. What would do you have appetite for that scale of development now? And if not, what would need to change to create the conditions for you to take on those kind of schemes in the future again?
Well, Berkeley probably in the last 4 years has changed its model fundamentally to actually on very large scale urban regeneration sites. And so we have 25 of those at the moment, and we have 15 coming. So what Simon was talking about is, one of them that's coming is in Beckton. We could build 20,000 homes in Beckton. This land is owned either publicly or in ownership with us. We own 70 acres of it in our ownership. If we build any homes in Beckton in the next 10 years, I will be surprised. And that is the issue. So I believe there is enough brownfield land. I believe there's enough outlets. It's what we do. It's the time it takes to bring these new outlets on stream. And that's not so much one you have to talk to the local community, because actually it's sort of, we're next to a DLR site. It is zoned for planning. So we've got to move the DLR. We've got to extend the DLR. We're talking to Homes England about that side of it. We're talking to TfL again. And one of the things we're talking about TfL is retaining the rights we can build over their railways. So, again, if you do that, you can build another 5,000 homes. So I don't believe there's a shortage of brownfield land. I agree that you need to, and I said this, that's why I'm brownfield first. I still think you need to bring forward poor greenbelt. And partly the point I was making about in town centres. So to answer your question about appetite, we have huge appetite. Old Oak Common is a really hard one to unlock. I think it does come back to compulsory purchase order and viability, and that is a real issue that we've got to resolve. This white paper is supposed to be getting rid of viability. That's a hugely that's why I go about local negotiations for very large schemes. That's why I actually personally think town centres have a lot more issues to resolve. Ultimately in the land supply, because they've really got to, as Gavin said, a lot of them are historic areas. They've got to repurpose. They have an awful lot of car parking to get rural people into those town centres. How you densify those areas locally and bring local communities along with you, I think, is a huge challenge. But I don't see it as a land supply issue. I see it as a planning, delivery issue, and actually people. I've always said this about London to a degree where we work in is we really need, London's building 12,000 homes. We need 90,000 or 60,000. What we need is probably there are 200 sites in London that are brownfield that could deliver 200 sites a year, and then you can make the rest up with other infill developments. And I just think you just need to bring those forward and sit on those and make them happen. And I think we're very guilty at talking very high level. We sort of talk about high level numbers and then not actually deliver in some areas. And therefore, I've never felt it being a land supply issue, but it is a delivery issue and a planning issue.
Thank you. There's a question here from Jerry Gardner, which is, earlier Robert Jenrick said design quality was a golden thread running through the planning reforms. How on earth is expansion of permitted development consistent with that aim? So it's hard to reconcile permitted development with beauty and quality and placemaking. This doesn't need to be long answers from any of you, but some quick reflections on that would be great. So I will start with you, Gavin.
Well, I think it's a challenge. And I think the government were talking about making some changes to PD to try and address some of that. I don't know if the question was put to Rob directly earlier. One of the things, if I reflect back on my year as housing minister, one of the things that's difficult is sometimes you've got decisions where you know exactly what the right answer is and what you want to do. And sometimes you're taking a balanced decision where it's not perfect and you're trying to decide, does this give me more good things than bad things? And that's really how I felt about the PD for office conversion. I thought we were in a crisis where we desperately need numbers, and that policy clearly was bringing forward some additional units. And when I went and saw the schemes in my own constituency, some of them were good and some of them were not great at all. And therefore, I entirely understood the arguments of people who said, we're not very happy about this, and you had to take a balance about where the priorities were. But I think that whole wider question about how you prioritise beauty and design in the system is one of the real challenges in terms of the consultation paper that they published just before the summer.
Thank you. Rob, would Berkeley Group do permitted development? Do you do permitted development?
We haven't done permitted development. I think Gavin half touched on what I see as the issue. You bring in permitted developments to speed up planning. The white paper is very confused about nationalism and localism and middleism, whichever authority you're in, GLA, whatever that's called. And the problem is when you come out with building beautiful, or you could end up with a regulated regime which is incredibly complex to navigate in a rule-based system instead of it being so you end up with people putting rules about it. Permitted development was absolutely right, but it went too far in terms of you weren't allowed to, for example, change the windows, the external appearance of the building. And if you could have done that very quickly, you could have got more beautiful buildings. So for speed and simplicity, it made it an imperfect solution. So it was absolutely the right policy. It was just the implementation of it made it incredibly difficult for some buildings. But no, we don't do permitted developments. Look, anything you can do to speed up, I think, the planning, environment, and still try and get beauty is really important. But unfortunately, in some of those buildings that Gavin mentioned, they just didn't convert very well. And they actually you end up with some very poor flats as well, poor design flats, poor layouts, poor window positions, poor amenities.
Okay, thank you. Question here towards Simon. It's from Katrina Rydell, and it says that she agrees with you that we need to keep investing in places but government keeps referring to local plans as housing plans, and that perhaps that sends the wrong message. And I think it is really important, the messages we send out, and actually, as local politicians and having been a council leader yourself, it's also with Lord Barwell here as well, it's so important actually the signals that central government send, the language that they use, and then how that's interpreted. But it'd be great to get your thoughts on how do we get that investment in place, and that you talked about some really exciting schemes, but actually quite often it is just that small bit of infrastructure of connectivity, and it's about place. But it'd be good to get your thoughts on Homes England as a placemaker as well as an investor and partner.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't get into too many acronyms, but there's something called SHIF. Watch out for SHIF. SHIF. At the moment, you've got the Housing Infrastructure Fund. That's about £4.5 billion. Maybe it's 5.5 billion, which is administered by Homes England. In the budget, and also as we go through the spending review, we are looking at the Single Housing and Infrastructure Fund, which will be, a significant quantum of money, way above what HIF was, and that will give Homes England that opportunity to take more of a master planner role in bringing forward some of these large developments, to acquire land, consolidate the land holding, take it through master planning, put the infrastructure investment in there, and to help bring forward the sorts of sites which I'm sure Rob and all of Rob's competitors want to try and bring forward. So SHIF, an acronym, but that is going to actually define what Homes England does moving forward to a great degree. But just to touch on another point, we took papers to the board of Homes England about what was the aspiration of the agency in terms of design quality, sustainability, net zero. And this was discussed, and we read closely, and I was at the launch of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission's findings, which was presented by the Secretary of State. And there was, I think, justifiable criticism of Homes England, and we can do more to bring about beautiful places. And so we took a number of different policy development thoughts to the board in terms of what we want to do in these areas. And in every single case, the board wanted to be a thought leader and a practical leader in what we did to lead the market in terms of the quality of places which were being built, the sustainability agenda, and helping to achieve net zero. So, that's where the agency will be positioning itself. And with the capital it has deployed through things like SHIF, it will be able to hopefully build beautiful homes in the right places.
Thank you. So everybody should look out for SHIF as it comes forward. I think there's been some questions here around the proposed planning reforms, and we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I think it would be really good to touch on the planning reforms. One of the major proposals with the planning reforms is the removal of Section 106s, which from the housing association sector, really, really important part of our supply. But also enables us to deliver mixed communities. And I know they're not perfect, and I know the negotiations really depend on the partner and the council, but actually, on the whole, they've been really successful. Ambition to replace it with a national levy, completely get that. It's about providing consistency, simplicity, all of those things. But questions here about how is this going to work in practice? And it'd just be great to get your reflections on that, of actually making sure we get high quality mixed communities in all places, and in particular the questions here in the comment box around how do we make that work for areas of lower land value where regeneration needs to take place, and it isn't so simple that you can just capture high amount of value and do the development. So just some final thoughts on planning reform, like 30 seconds each would be great. We're going to start with Gavin.
So I'm very excited about this, but I think the devil is all in the detail. I think it is right that the state tries to capture more of the uplift in land value when land is given planning permission. In terms of lower value sites, the threshold is clearly important. And Rob's point is very important, I think, about variable rates, not just a single rate, given the complexity of some sites. And it is very important that we get at least as much affordable housing and on site so we get mixed communities. So really exciting, one of the most exciting bits of the paper, in my view. But the devil is all in the detail and has to be got right.
Great, thank you. And Simon, your views?
I think the aspiration is right. We have not only a housing crisis, but we have an affordability crisis as well. for people to have high quality sort of homes to live in, and also to give people the opportunity, should they want to aspire to own their own home, to lower the ladders to allow people to get onto the housing ladder. And I think what is planned in the white paper is looking to do that. The devil will be in the detail. I've been a council leader, and I've seen the games developers play to get out of their 106 obligations. And Rob is right. And it just slows up the whole process. I could cry with shame and sorrow when I cycle on my bike past sites where nothing has happened, and we've been trying to get housing on it for 5-6 years. And so, look, I think anything which speeds it up, simplifies it, creates more affordable housing has got to be a good thing.
Brilliant, thank you, Rob. In 30 seconds, do you want to give your views?
I'm sorry, I think probably more London focused, and I agree there's more challenges across the country. I think the mayor's policy of saying 35% affordable is, and then you get truly fast track, if not, you've got a review, I think is the right way. Then I believe Section 106 should be just tailored for the local community and the scheme to get the houses developed. Therefore, I don't totally agree with the other two panelists that I like the infrastructure levy at all, but I understand for simplification, it may work on some sites, but it doesn't work on all sites. But I fundamentally agree we've got to build enough affordable homes to give affordability. And that's why for us as a developer, we've signed up to the 35%. Where I get into trouble where we get into trouble about deliverability of homes is when he tries to protect the mayor, for example, strategic industrial land, and moves affordable to 50%, and you have no viability at all, and you get no homes at all. And that's fundamentally what's happened. So it's been pragmatic. Time to go.
It is. So just to wrap up at the end of this, so we just got timed out, just to say a massive, massive thanks to Lord Barwell, to Rob Perrins, to Simon Dudley. Apologies for my tech issues. I think in conclusion, I think we need all of our towns and cities to have a prosperous future. They might look different. We might need to reinvent the high street. We might definitely need to do some investment in the feel of our civic infrastructure in those places, but it's about high quality development, placemaking, working together to get the best outcomes, the best mix, true affordability right across the country. Thanks all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Perrins, can you see? Yeah, great.